Hey Anvita, thank you so much for being a part of the Strategy Podcast. This is the first show I'm recording with the Chief of Staff, so I'm very excited, and I'm sure there is a lot to learn in this session.
Delighted to be a part, Rohit.
Thank
Glad
you.
I can help.
Thank you. So my first question to you, Anvita, is why didn't you take me or us through your background? Where did you start? I read through your LinkedIn profile. You've been an alumni of IIT Bombay. Then you moved into consulting. Then as a venture capitalist, you worked with Sequoia, and then you transitioned into the chief of staff role. So why didn't you take us through your early journey and how did you land finally into the chief of staff position?
Sure, Rohit. And in a nutshell, you've actually laid out the milestones, key milestones per se. I'll maybe touch upon a few softer aspects of why did those milestones really happen. So I hail from Indore, which is a small town in India, and that's where I finished my schooling till 12th standard, and figured that engineering is something I want to do. Not with a lot of logic at typically at that age, at least at those times. It was more of the friend circle I was a part of. All of us were just kind of putting in long hours to study for JE. Was fortunate to crack it and make it to IIT Bombay. The 4 years at campus were just incredible in terms of the learning and exposure you can get. And I'm referring to not just friends or a lot of references that you can get in terms of network, but also exposure in terms of what you can develop as skill sets, be it leadership, be it teamwork. You're exposed to a lot of extracurricular activities which are over and above your regular academics. So I was a part of the intra-IIT badminton team. I've been a badminton, I've been a badminton player rather from school days. Not like a national champ or something, but I played district and state and stuff. And I realized that at campus there are intra-IIT tournaments for multiple sports, and that being a soft spot, I kind of jumped in. Not just fitness element of the sport was of playing actually got touched, but I actually worked and played with the badminton team, which instilled in me a beautiful teamwork as a skill set, because you're cheering for your campus, you're cheering for your team, and that's an unparalleled feeling which you kind of develop for yourself. Apart from that, a few other things. So I was a part of the core group team at Tech Fest, which is Asia's largest science and technology festival. We, at that point in time, used to get a footfall of about 150,000 people joining us at campus for about 2 days. We used to organize a series of events, competitions, exhibitions, lecture series. And I was a part of the core team who was typically 20, 22 of us in our third year. And used to spend long hours just ideating on what do we want to make out of this Asia's largest festival of science and technology, the platform that you get, the stage that you get, how can you make the most of it? So was fortunate to be a part of that. A series of such developments at campus led me to probably internalize what really is my strength or what is core to me. And what stood out was that driving impact or driving leadership is something that appeals to me the most. So much so that in my final year at IIT Bombay, I actually co-founded a venture in edtech space. We were called Scoodle, which was a learning management system on the cloud for colleges, institutions, etc. I kind of got a feeling of the real grit that kind of founders go through. In my first year, in the first year of the venture, in my final year, we actually did about 25-30 lakh worth of sales by bringing on board about 4 to 5 large institutions, and went on to execute those service contracts that we signed with them. So got a beautiful or a end-to-end understanding of, I wouldn't say starting and running a venture per se, but working on an idea and implementing it to a phase that you can say there's an MVP done. I could have, eventually scaled Scoodle if that's something I wanted to do. But then came the time where I was to evaluate career options and what's in it that I want to do long term. I didn't want to take a startup stance right away after college, because from whatever mentorship I got, I realized that this will be a short-term call if I right now continue my venture. I should get some professional experience, and if I was getting a chance to work at a firm like say a BCG, I think that would have been definitely helpful for me to develop a lot of core strengths around analytics and problem solving and structured approach, etc. So spent rigorous time to kind of get for that, and was fortunate to get in. Worked about for 2 years at BCG, worked across different sectors in core infra and consumer. And the regular projects like cost cutting and just restructuring a bunch of business units, etc. I was working with billion-dollar clients and got a beautiful exposure on analytics and problem-solving side of it. But wanted to come back in the startup ecosystem in some form and realize that the best form that I can do that is from the other side of the table as an investor. And that's when Sequoia happened. Joined their consumer and healthcare team, was there for about 2 years, got a great exposure on the core answers that I was really looking at in terms of how our startups evaluated, how our sectors are really evaluated in terms of market sizing, competition analysis, so much so that what can I say is an investable business and how what kind of valuations should I be looking at. So saw end-to-end, a few end-to-end deals and was fortunate to understand that entire process in and out. And yeah, I think post that came the journey of the chief of staff, where I wanted to get an operator role or an operator experience because I wanted to drive impact myself. I wanted to empathize with the founder journey, but also was not in the zone of being able to risk being a founder in terms of the risk of financial risks or even a risk of what's the idea I'm really passionate about. Didn't have open or clear answers by then and realized, hey, it's a journey I wanted to take. It's a set of learnings I'm looking at. So might as well join a early stage high growth venture where I can create impact, drive impact as good as a founding team member. So I'm going to stop here. Maybe I overextended what you would have
No,
expected
no.
me to.
That's amazing. And in fact, I can resonate a lot with a lot of it that you just said, because my journey has been pretty similar. One thing, though, I'm jealous of you because, I was doing chartered accountancy and it's a correspondence program, although it's very difficult, but I never got a chance to be in an institutional setup where you have so many things and, you can involve yourself and from badminton to societies, which grows you as a person and makes you ready for the challenges to come. So that's very interesting. And I have a couple of questions from this, but I think I will just take it as we move ahead. I want to ask you a little bit about your experience as a management consultant. Now, I see a lot of job postings on for the chief of staff role today in the Indian startup tech ecosystems, especially. And I see them mentioning very clearly that if you have a background in investment banking or venture capital or in the consulting space, that would be a huge plus. Why is that? How much of what you learn in those jobs has a direct impact on your role as a chief of staff?
That's a great question, Rohit. And I'll just caveat that I am exposed to a kind of role of chief of staff, which for me, I mean, chief of staff doesn't define what your work is, right? So you kind of need to dig that deeper to understand what your real role is. I exactly know the skill sets that each of these past professional experiences would have contributed in my current chief of staff position. And that's the caveat that if your chief of staff responsibility is similar to what mine was, which was as good as a founding team member, this will help what I'll share now. So I think it's extremely specific and clear, right? I mean, we're talking about joining as a chief of staff at a high growth early stage venture, which means almost everything you look at is broadly either broken or not where it should be, which means there's scope of improvement in every possible element that you can pick in that venture, which gives you chaos. And hence, when you're looking at your time at a BCG, for instance, you get problem solving and structured approach as a core of how you'll approach any case that you're designated to, right? Even if at an associate level, at the entry level that you join, you may be given a very, very small part of a problem statement, but you're kind of trained and expected to have a very structured approach to solving it, saying, okay, if the company is facing losses, what can contribute to losses? You figure out the specifics of each and further break them into buckets, saying, okay, what can contribute to these losses, and kind of solve them in a very, very structured way. I think those two skill sets of problem solving and structured thinking kind of come in very handy when you're looking to solve for this chaos, because you need to prioritize, you need to create that classic 2x2 of how much impact can come from what input you give at. You have to focus on something where you put in least input but are able to drive maximum impact. And that approach or that framework is generally natural or comes naturally to consultants who have worked in the past. And being a chief of staff, one now transitioning out of the role, and hence I was in a position to hire chief of staff for my handover. I completely second on how how critical or differentiated can a consulting experience be for you if you're looking for a chief of staff at an early stage venture? From an investing standpoint, or being an investment banker or venture capitalist, a very key element of typically what entails in your chief of staff role is that these early stage ventures will be out for fundraising, will be out for venture capital fundraising, and your founder will want to look up to you for not just network, because that's still typically what founders can drive, but the entire back end of once a conversation starts. Right from saying that I'm able to prove that my TAM in the baby care market is $75 billion, and this is the breakup of it bottom up as well as top down in terms of reports, to saying what kind of competition is there in the US and China, and why do we say that India can, become a big opportunity. To coming to specifics about the company, saying these are the company historicals in terms of financials. This is how we're looking at projections, and we look to become a $100 million company next 5 years. Not a lot of founders will be extremely comfortable with getting into depths of these numbers, because of which they will want to rely on a chief of staff who is a pseudo founding member, or will be in those conversations and meetings with investors. The founder will want the chief of staff to be around to take a bunch of these specifics that investors kind of look for. And hence, the ideal combination naturally becomes a consultant plus a venture capital background. Looks like you have a few things taken care of in terms of your skill sets, what you take on, and what I can now thump the table. What I took back was the hardcore grit of building the venture out, extreme perseverance, being very rock solid on the final mission you're looking at in terms of the long term vision of the company, being extremely anal about wanting to achieve that, and hence just being constantly aware that there is a longer mission that you're on, ensuring that the culture of the team is driven by the way you work, because you do join at a very senior position. So being cognizant of that and driving leaders and leaderships and other team members with that. A few of those things kind of come in, not very directly as a part of the previous roles as a consultant or venture capitalist, but a few things which can drive about 60 to 75% of your role will be from these previous experiences that come handy.
That's interesting. And a follow-up that I have here is when it comes to management consulting, you told me it's very structured, the way you are looked to or expected to approach a given problem statement. It could be small for an associate or an analyst, and it would grow as you grow into that role. But one thing which the critics of management consultants say is they come up with these, jargons and cash cows and dogs, and bring all of these farm animals in, and they try to bring a lot of structure. It works when you're advising a client who is also structured, so which is why you probably work with some of the largest Fortune 500 firms in the world. Does it change in a startup? Because you just said it's all chaos there, right? And in chaos, can you bring those structured systems which work well in the management consulting Fortune 500 space and apply them into this unstructured chaotic environment?
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful point, Rohit, you make. But my answer to that will be an absolute yes. And I'll tell you why. Because everything breaks down to first principle at management consulting, right? And that's from where all these cash cows and the farm animals, as you put it, kind of come out. If you look to them on paper, they will look theories. But as a consultant, and it's interesting that there has been an interesting shift of how clients, even the largest structured clients, are now expecting consultants to actually prove their theories that they kind of have these 100-page of PPTs. They're expected to implement those and kind of deliver the change they promised to do. And that was a shift that also came in when I was working at BCG as well. So my last case at BCG, and I did just 2 or 3 large cases, I was there for just 2 years. My last case at BCG was actually a 13-month long case in Kolkata, where the first 3 months was pure strategy, but the balance was to actually implement that strategy and deliver the results we expected to. There can be chaos even at a large organization, and not there can be, there is chaos even at a large organization. I think since you approach every problem with a 101 or your first principle, you can absolutely bring a structure to a very chaotic smaller organizations as well. And I've seen that help me build Baby Chakra. So I can second that it's absolutely possible. It's first principle at the end of the day for both
Got it.
places.
I want to come to Baby Chakra now. Why did you start with the journey of how did you find this role? How did you discover it? Was it through your network, or did you find a job opening somewhere? And how did this entire process happen? How did you finally get into the company?
Sure. So like I was sharing earlier that I was keen to get on an operator experience while at Sequoia, and hence the conversation or the thought around where should I move next started there. I started reaching out to a few Sequoia portfolio founders, which was the natural thing for me. I started meeting them, spending time with them, understanding how they're looking at businesses, and if there's a way I could work with them to kind of drive the impact I was looking to drive. There were a couple of shortlists as well, which I was seriously considering, but at the same time, I was open to networking with other founders as well. The conversation with my current founder at Baby Chakra happened kind of by chance. They were looking for a chief of staff, it seems, and I was reached out probably among the hundreds of those who they had reached out to. And I just set up a 30-minute chat saying it's harmless. I mean, Naya, who's the founder, she comes with an exemplary background herself. She's an ex-management consultant, was at HBS then, and then she started Baby Chakra. So figured it's harmless to kind of do a conversation. We had a 30-minute chat on calendar, which actually lasted for a 3-hour long conversation.
Wow.
We kept talking, we kept discussing on how I would build Baby Chakra if I was to be building it with her. And it was amazing to see how we were converging on a lot of points. A lot of how I was thinking we should kind of launch business verticals in terms of revenue streams was something she was envisioning as well. And that was a direct click. Both of us could relate to saying there's something happening here. I mean, there's something we should materialize in terms of a relationship. And the conversations progressed, and it was the click that both of us had amongst us that we wanted to.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. Tell me something. And as I understand this role correctly, it's working directly with the executive team, the senior executive team, building out the core strategy, operations, managing it end to end. What do you think or should be the ideal key character traits in a person? The the human skills that we are talking about these days a lot, right? What kind of skills do you need to have apart from the technical skills, of course, in finance or strategy that you learn um, that you have learned in your previous jobs? What kind of human skills that you need to really deliver in this job? Because it involves talking to a lot of stakeholders, managing a lot of them
Yeah,
simultaneously, and managing so many expectations is very difficult.
true. That's very true. I think three things come to mind. First is just um, acknowledging that you're joining at a leadership position, which means that you will drive culture of the firm. And I kind of touched upon that briefly a little bit earlier, but the catch here is that since you will end up either recruiting these leaders or there are management teams already in place and you're going to work closely with them, it will be your working style that will be in addition to the founders, as is the case. I mean, at large
Mm.
organizations, it's how the founder works drives sets the tone of how your team will look up, how your team will look at the company as well, and that starts mimicking to what's expected out of you as well. So that's a very subconscious element which you should be aware about. You should probably take some initial active steps to ensure that you're setting the tone right of your working style. um, the second that comes to my mind is just acknowledging the fact that there will be chaos. And I'm just caveating that this is not a COS position for a well-established, large organization. It's relatively smaller, a 30-member team or a 40-member team, where you're still seeing that hockey stick growth every single day. There are newer problems to solve. And while you solve them, it can get overwhelming in terms of what all is moving and what all is needs to kind of get improved. You should just internalize that this may be the case for some time, and you should be comfortable with that. You should be comfortable giving in long hours. But that's not a human behavior per se, but that's just your buy-in into what role you're signing up for. You should be like 100% there in terms of being able to say that this is my venture I'm building. I have my stakes in it to prove its success, because I'm vested in it not just financially or for whatever ESOPs you get, etc. I'm vested in because I care about the passion, what the company is building towards. I love the team I'm working with. So that's the second element of, again, the wit that you come with, or the passion that you come with. You should be passionate about what you're joining. It shouldn't just be a decision you take with, maybe because it's offering you better compensation anyway. I don't think a COS position can be justified if it's just you're coming in just for that. You need more in terms of motivations and incentives to get up at a 7 a.m. call if it is for a US investor, something like that. And the third thing that comes to my mind, and you kind of correctly addressed earlier, that a lot of pieces are moving in terms of the thing you're trying to build. What's going to be critical for you is to constantly have the long-term vision in mind and not be very, very swayed by something that's coming short-term and appealing to you. You should be cognizant that you're eventually building for the long term in terms of a brand. You shouldn't be at all in a position to take a decision which can at all hamper the brand for a short-term gain in terms of, some, I don't know, some business or some revenue or some growth of users. I think you should be you should acknowledge that you're working for the long term in it. You're working because you aim to be the largest parenting platform in the country, and whatever it takes for you to do that is something you're doing, not because you short term want to put something in the MIS in terms of growth of users. You may do something which may be borderline, not legit, or maybe tricky a little bit. Just be conscious to avoid that. You may be tempted to do it in a small, early stage startup where a few of these things kind of end up matching a lot in that point in time. But that long term vision is critical, because it's not the short term that will at all help you succeed for long.
Wow, got it. Tell me, Anvita, when you look at this role, one critical element is having that uh, approach to work with a lot of different stakeholders. So, probably managing cross functional projects where you're probably leading on behalf of the CEO, pushing that agenda forward, and then managing so many different senior executives together. Uh, I'm pretty sure, and as much as everybody is trying to push that common agenda forward, there could be times when there are clash of egos or issues propping up. How does a chief of staff mitigate it and work around it to make sure everybody is streamlined and we're moving from one pillar to post achieving our goal post?
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there will be a bunch of conflicts that end up occurring, and I'll tell you one core reason, which at least I've observed the most, why it happens is because there is a metric or a set of metrics that the company wants to achieve as a company, as a business, right? But that gets broken down into individual metrics for each team, which they hold as their, say, KPIs, or which they hold as their go-to milestones for the next 1 month, 1 week, whatever timeline the businesses are comfortable with, right? Not each of those individual metrics end up getting directly tied into what you want to achieve as a business metric, right? And I'll give you a classic example. For instance, if our goal for the end of the month is that we're looking at doing like 5 million monthly active users, right? Now breaking that down into, say, and I'm giving you context of a company like Baby Chakra, which is into content, community, and then eventually commerce as well. One of the smaller KPIs for teams will be to publish, say, some infographic content, which will in turn drive shares, which will in turn drive communities to engage, like, comment, share, etc., and will in an indirect fashion contribute to monthly active users. Now, the team who's operating or building that infographic is the team that will only look at the number of infographics, for example, that are being going out. But that getting linked to that 5 million number for the month may not be something which, as explicit direction, may be clear to the team, for example, and that's okay. That need not be the case. They know what their operational goals are, and they achieve towards it. What interestingly happens is that during the month or during that time, there could be some interesting initiatives in terms of, say, some tie-ups that come in, some partnerships that come in, which the company ends up seeing relatively critical, or something that we cannot not do. We need to do them because they will contribute directly or in a similar fashion to the monthly active users we're looking at. The chief of staff there needs to intervene to ensure that the teams who was now making infographics will also need to work with the partnership we've gotten in, because that will also contribute to the monthly active users, which starts generating a bit of chaos again in some way to them, because their daily work per se for them has not been what they expected at the start of the month. Now, this is a very, very small example of, what kind of clashes may happen or what kind of conflicts may start happening. There are numerous such instances where, some other team leads need some priority work for their vertical, and they're codependent on some other team because they kind of help them with say, social media or emailers or SMSs and all of that. Where I, as the chief of staff, and typically chiefs of staff when they kind of intervene, is to bring in the perspective of the outside in perspective, saying, um, ideally we should do both the things. Ideally, there shouldn't be yes, one or a two that we should be doing. Ideally, we should be doing both. That's the stance we come in with. But if that is not possible because of basic constraints, and that's very common again in smaller stage startups, you will be always constrained for resources and bandwidth. It's on me as the chief of staff to take a call on what is the real priority. Where do I see that impact in terms of either short term or long term, whatever the call needs to be taken at that point in time, and be able to drive direction to the team so that they need not just be directionally clear on what they should do in terms of activities, but have the vision of why is one being chosen over the other. And if even if in the short term it may feel that it is not directly impacting what we set out to achieve, it has to link with the business goals. It has to link with maybe longer term activities at this point in time. But this is the most common set of conflicts that at least I've come across, and I can absolutely be certain that it's standard across these early stage ventures, where prioritizing and being able to see that long term direction and vision becomes a area of conflict. And as a chief of staff, you just want to intervene by putting the lens of an outside in perspective to say that what's right for business right now, and be able to prioritize with teams effectively.
That's a very interesting point, Anvita. When you say you have to make those decisions as a chief of staff to balance the trade-offs between short-term and long-term goals of the organization. And in fact, when I was doing the research for this role and I was going through Brian Rimmer's interview, where he was talking about how he manages these conflicts, and he said one point which kind of stuck to me. He said, "You have to establish your own credibility in the organization." And so it's very important that they should not think of you as the CEO's man, and you have to use that designation rather sparingly. It's you have to build that trust with the team. What do you have to say for that? Do you think that's true for you?
That's
Do you
100%
do
true,
you
Rohit.
avoid using your CEO to get work done? Or were there times in your team when you were dealing with somebody who was too difficult that you actually had to do it?
Yeah, so I will address that. I want to touch upon the initial point you made, that you want to establish your own credibility as you join the organization. I think that's 100% correct because, and just another small layer of perspective there, whatever my age is right now is not similar to what other leaders in the company may be
Right.
in terms of just age, right? And that's very common to a consultant who joins right out of IIT. Is thrown this comment by numerous clients that, hey, my daughter and son is older than what you are and what you're going to tell me in terms of work. um, it's very important to establish your credibility by way of your skill sets, by way of your analysis, and that holds true even in a smaller organization, probably a little more because it so feels that those and I'm not experienced it. I'm generically talking that it so happens that other leaders in the organization end up feeling that I come with more experience. I know this shit and I can solve it probably better than you who don't have that experience right now. So it's critical you build your credibility yourself. The way to do that is never to bring up saying CEO ne bola hai isliye kare. It's never a good idea. It doesn't help you with building your own credibility. What you should do though is, and at least what worked for me, I hope rather what worked for me is that I would try to be in their teams as much as I would be in, say, the CEO's team in some way, because eventual goal for me was to solve the problem. It was never a stance that I come in kind of bashing and saying this has to be done, so figure it out, and I kind of move out of the room. That was never the stance. The idea was always to problem solve with them, get into the depths of where they're stuck in terms of implementation, which means that I'm a part of their team, and the CEO is that person who's actually probably bashing. And hence, I was in a position to be able to establish that sort of credibility by jumping into their shoes as needed, helping them get to the depths of the problems they're looking to solve, where they're stuck operationally, and being able to debottleneck that. Have I
Being,
ever used the
being devious is certainly not a skill worth having as a chief of staff.
Not at all, not at all. It won't take you places at all. Very, very short term that you may look at. Yeah.
Tell me something, Anvita. So if a young professional or a guy who's in fourth year right now, looking to get into this position, right? Trying to craft it. He does not have a management consulting or a venture capital background. How does he build, the right communication through his resume or CV that would exemplify that he could do it, right? If he wants to go and approach an early stage founder and craft this role for him, how do you think he should approach this?
Sure. And that's, I think I'll be able to address that probably more in a more thorough fashion right now, because I've been seeing a bunch of profiles who've applied for the chief of staff position at Baby Chakra, and we've been able to freeze on one who's an excellent new joinee as well. But um, I'll tell you how it may be broken down. One, the candidate needs to be very sure that he or she wants to do this job. I think that's the starting point where you know what you may get into. The chaos I was talking about, the unstructured approach you were talking about, but then the extremely steep learning as well, what you eventually look up to. You should know what you're getting into. If in that fourth year, for some reason, you're enlightened that this is something I want to aspire, um, forget management consulting or venture capital for now. I think the few core skills we spoke about in terms of problem solving, in terms of structured approach, in terms of the, I think the skill sets of financial accounting and all of that can be built in via a few digital courses. So that's not the biggest of the worries. But just being able to problem solve and drive impact at scale will be a very big value add for a founder who is looking at having a chief of staff in. So for those aspirants, I think some advice could be that try and join another startup, or try and join a firm where you may not be the chief of staff. You may be somebody running a business unit, or maybe somebody leading a particular vertical, but you're exposed to those kind of uncertainties and problems which you're able to solve for and drive the impact, which is going to be very, very relevant and helpful for the founder. And that's something that can get you in, definitely in the interview room. I have interviewed a bunch of entrepreneurs who may be either entrepreneurs or senior team leaders at younger ventures, who mentioned about how they were able to solve a bunch of interesting problems, which I could relate to. And I could see that, if they come to Baby Chakra and are able to solve this, they can. So that's one approach. And yeah, I think eventually, if at all you're able to prove those specific core skill sets in one fashion or the other, you should be good.
Amazing. Tell me something. You're now going to Harvard Business School. Uh, a lot of people I see, as I was going through their profiles as chief of staffs at both tech startups and established large MNCs, everybody, almost everybody, like 9 in 10 profiles, they have an MBA from any of these premier institutions, either in India or the Ivy League. Why do you think? Why have you decided to now, having all of this experience under your belt? Where do you think the role? What's the role of an MBA, and how does it fit into this role? Right? Why are people who are doing it now, and why are you doing it now after going through this grind of being an entrepreneur, being a management consultant? Because these are the roles that people explore after an MBA. You've already done it. So what's the catch? What are you trying to do?
Sure. So I may not be able to generalize that.
Mm,
Uh, there are some things in say a Quora where you'll hear why people do an MBA, and that could be a generic one that you can take. I can absolutely share my story
absolutely.
because that's personal. So for me, after the 2.5 years of building Baby Chakra, a couple of things enlightened me in some way. That I love the experience of the learning I got here. I completely empathize with the founder journey and the passion the founder needs. But I also saw a bunch of learnings in terms of how much you need to put in terms of your time commitment, your personal commitment, your emotional commitment. And hence, one of the takeaways for me was that I love being around the startup ecosystem, and I do want to continue being in this, but not as a founder at this point in time. I want to go back to investing, where I'm able to work alongside a lot of such passionate founders and drive impact via them at scale. So that's something that started, coming to mind about a year from now, after the time I started thinking about an MBA. In full honesty, an MBA at this point is a bit of a 2-year break in some way, where I'm just trying to get a breather, get a bunch of exposure in terms of international networking, explore opportunities abroad in India, and just kind of internalize, how is my long term for me. A few things that are getting clearer is that investing is something I want to do, which means I may want to spend some time internationally to grasp the investing expertise and strategies of funds there, and be in a position to kind of come back and add value to the investing ecosystem again. For me, that was a short answer of why MBA fit right now. Can't generalize, but interesting to see that 9 out of 10 of your chief of staff positions had an MBA. So
Yeah, all of them,
that's interesting.
almost all of them. Um, Interesting. Now, I want to move ahead and ask you, if you have to decide on, what makes this extremely rewarding, right, this experience, what would be those big takeaways for you, the role of
Sure.
being a superstar?
Um, Yeah. So you can break them in two buckets, like the largest buckets. One is your financial return, which you get vested in, not just from the basic comp you take, but because you bet that I'm going to make this company more valuable than it is today as at the point time you join, you kind of negotiate for better ESOPs or, worth of better shareholding in the company for whatever it's worth. Right? So that's one direct reward in terms of a financial tangible reward.
Mm.
That's there, and that's on you. In some ways you're vested in yourself. The more value add you do in some way, you're rewarded in a proportionate way, whatever, right? That's the first direct tangible element of it. The non-tangible softer elements of it are extremely hard to just narrow them down and share with you in terms of a few pointers. But like I was sharing earlier, just the passion of building a venture and driving impact is something that I take as a reward for myself. I got into an organization like this at this role because that's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking to run a business or build a business as a pseudo founder, which I got a chance to do. See the highest of the highs. I was actually in San Francisco at the Google Global Accelerator program, pitching Baby Chakra because we were a part of the team there. And the high I got there saying I'm building a venture, or I'm building a venture with a team that is actually serving more than 2 million young families in India. That was the high. That was a reward I absolutely happily cherish. And then I've seen even the lowest of the lows where I had to shut one of my initiatives. I had to let a few people go because that didn't make a lot of business sense at this point in time. All of these learnings kind of put together give you a strong sense of empathizing with the founder journey, that while it may seem beautiful and
Mm.
extremely rewarding to the outside world, it's just learning in the initial phases, and you need to accept that. And a lot of the elements of just the culture setting in the team, hiring, being able to prioritize things, being able to drive impact tangibly by the metrics you're looking to build. Actually set up revenue verticals, because that's one of the pieces I said and I came in for. I was passionate about, I was excited about. So doing that, seeing to scale, and now handing over that vertical with a completely new team that's building it. So seeing that through as well. I think a lot of these operational elements you take back as a learning, as a reward, which is the softer skills of it. Yeah.
Tell me something, as I could gather from your conversation, and as an entrepreneur myself, I think being an entrepreneur is being a jack of all trades, right? You have to know a little bit of everything. And that's how as you're telling me more and more about the chief of staff role, I see it as a generalist role, right? Where you know a bit about marketing, you know a bit about finance, you know a bit about investing and organizations and structures and hiring and culture building, everything, right? It's so mixed up.
Yeah.
Huh? How do you uh, what's the role of having a specialization into in a role which is so generalist? Do you think somebody who
Sorry,
has a
I.
back who if you think somebody who has a background in general management suits better for this role than somebody who has a specialist degree?
I think that's absolutely nuanced.
Mm.
I can totally think of, say, a venture that's maybe right now in the short term not struggling, but is looking to build their marketing capabilities, and chief of staff spending 50% of her time doing that, but the balance 50% in taking care of the other responsibilities of team management and culture
Right.
setting and hiring and all of that. I think it's very, very nuanced. Even for me, if I now connect the dots,
Mm.
eventually, I think even for me, I was passionate to just kind of build business from the beautiful community that Baby Chakra had, and that was one specialization in some way that I came in to add value with. Investing came as a specialization in itself also because I had the exposure. So I think it's nuanced. It's going to be case by case. It's going to be what you really see yourself bringing to the table and what the organization needs at that point.
Okay. I have one more follow-up question on this, which is around the fact that um, as a chief of staff, historically this role started in the military. It then percolated into the government, and then it got into corporates. Uh, it's adding one more layer of executive positions because now, especially in big companies, you have every head has a chief of staff. So a CTO has a chief of staff, a CEO, a CEO, everybody has a chief of staff. So when you have like so many people as a second rung layer of executives, does it create bureaucracy? Maybe not so much in a smaller early stage environment, but in a larger organization, have you seen it create any kind of impediment to the company's uh, growth or goals?
I think that's a interesting point you make, Rohit. And I mean, not that I have anecdotes to categorically share, but I'd like to believe that it actually doesn't. I think the chief of staff was hired in the first place because the person, the leader
Like
was
LinkedIn has like
extreme.
LinkedIn has almost like 15 chief of staffs while I was searching. Everybody has a chief of staff
Hmm.
there.
Yeah, but think about it, no, Rohit. I mean, the reason why this chief of staff position should have come in place is because the respective leaders, maybe the CEO, the CO, or the CTO, were managing teams which were, probably extremely large. There was a lot of inter-team dependencies, which was getting probably a little out of hand. And this chief of staff layer is kind of bringing that structure, bringing that coherency in the way teams may work, because that's an important element of why you bring in a chief of staff, right? I mean, I have experienced that with a solo founder, and I can absolutely tell you how difficult can it be for the founder or the founding team to just run the show across verticals, managing all of the team dependencies and ensuring that business meets its goals. I think this layer helps the founding team or the management team in a lot of ways to de-bottleneck a bunch of processes that may take long, weeks to just find a time in calendar and set up a meeting to solve that. Chief of staff, the chiefs of staff per se can get into discussions with specific teams, figure out the bottleneck and get processes running. So I'd like to believe that these roles were created and people were hired on these roles to help that out, and that's the only purpose they're solving. I don't think they should be adding another layer of bureaucracy. I mean, you're already having 4 structures. That's a fifth one getting added in terms of a layer at best. So I would like to believe that shouldn't be the
We're
case.
all talking about being agile, having these removing cubicles was the first step towards it, uh, and having cross-functional setups. So I don't know how does adding another layer benefit this overall structure. But that aside, I want to be the devil's advocate now for my next question and ask you, when should somebody not think about either from a founder's perspective, um, have a chief of staff, or from a professional's perspective, uh, not get into this space? So first, let's take the founder's perspective. When do you think an organization should not have a chief of staff?
I think, and
Because
I
it
think
has
that's
become
linking back to
fashionable to
what.
have one these days, is how I could perceive.
Yeah, and I see where you're coming from, and that does link to the earlier point you made. That is adding that chief of staff layer, just adding another layer of reporting if it's that. I think if it is really that, then the companies shouldn't look for getting a chief of staff role. It's not at all that you need that on paper. I think you should think about getting the chief of staff when you, as an organization, need a lot of inter-team dependencies and pieces you need to put together across teams, across verticals. And that is the case across all organizations. So it's a given that there will be things, but if things are getting out of hand a bit, or if you're seeing that there are higher dependencies in your being the bottleneck to be able to take some decisions which are impacting eventual business goals, if you see any of that happening, it should be the only time you get in a chief of staff. It shouldn't be the case that just for fad or just for everybody's doing it, so I'll do it kind of a thing. You should have them. I so don't think that should be the case. So yeah, that's how I'll see it. I think all early stage companies who have just one or two founders and are looking at exponential growth can make use of some exceptional chiefs of staff.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
What about a young professional? When do you think he should not go into a role like this? Because If you just read through the JD, it sounds amazing. You look at the compensation, it's even more amazing. You see the equity component, you're like, wow. So you don't think through what I am getting myself into, which is what you initially discussed. And then you end up making mistakes, and you can't make too many mistakes in this role. Maybe you were not the right fit. So, how do you evaluate yourself individually, making sure you're the right fit and you're going into this role consciously, not just for the money or the position or the limelight that you get working closely with the CEO?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so Rohit, this is something I've personally, uh, with the conversations I've been doing for transition, a bunch of interviews that I've been doing,
Mm.
a few of the candidates who I really liked in terms of their approach, their problem solving, their just thoroughness on the case studies they presented to us and stuff. So much so that I want to thumb the table saying, let's get this person on, get this, these people on. I realized that the culture fit and the expectation setting is very critical. And I've seen that how that can become the deal breaker for the professional to not want to take up this role. The culture fit is you knowing who the leadership team is, you knowing who the founder is, and not just from a professional level, knowing personally the way they operate. If if she's a morning person, if she's an evening person, if she's a coffee person or a tea person. I mean, so much so that you want to pick up the phone every single hour or 2 hours and just be in sync with the founder. You need to know that person, the CEO as the person, the leadership team as people, not just those professionals. That's the culture fit you need to establish. Are you comfortable working with those sets of people at the first place? And the second becomes the expectation setting fit, where you need to know what you're getting into. And that's a bit of onus on the firms or the organizations as well to ensure they're setting the right picture to the chief of staff. With whatever is going great needs to be shared, but whatever is not going great also needs to be shared with the layer of sanity that they can, how much ever they can share, they should. Because the chief of staff role, as you said, you can't make a lot of mistakes in this role, and if you end up getting hired for wrong reasons, you may just end up regretting that as a long-term decision that you should not have taken. So in addition to all the skill sets and the limelight, as you mentioned, the professional should be very sure about the culture fit and the expectation setting that's done for him or her.
Awesome. I just want to close this interview asking you, Anvita, anything that you think I should have asked and I missed, because I don't have any background as a chief of staff, so I don't know if I've covered everything. So it would be great if you can help me out. Anything that you think I should have asked you?
So nothing very specific, Rohit. I think you were extremely thorough. You touched upon the right. I mean, being an outsider gave you the more set of questions. I mean, had you known a bit about this, you would have been biased. So I think you had some very relevant questions. I think one thing we could have spent a bit more time on was what's the progression from the chief of staff. I mean, is it that you spend 2 years and maybe transition out, or do you see a longer term career in the organization? A bit about that may just help the professionals who are looking to take that on.
Then why
And
didn't you answer that question?
Happy to. So again, that's a bit nuanced, but if you're able to, so it's both ways, right? I mean, the organizations need to love you. The business, you need to prove your worth in the organization, and you personally should love what you're doing. Assuming that's the case, there can definitely be a bunch of track roads in terms of you becoming one of the COOs, or you becoming one of the business heads in terms of, say, driving one of the revenue verticals and leading a team of 100 below you, if as you kind of progress in the organization.
Mm.
So there can be multiple track roads depending on your fit, your interest, which the management team should be absolutely open to, because you've proved your worth and you're loving what you're doing. And the same is true for the other scenario where you love the 2.5, 3, 4 years that you spent, but you then also start evaluating the longer term piece for you there, which then is a transition out of the company saying, okay, this is amazing, this is great what I've learned, but now I want to figure something out in terms of my long-term career, and that again comes as a personal stance. But I just want to highlight out that there can be some great tracks that you can further continue to build on for yourself in terms of your worth or the rewards you look at. It may not just taper after a point, because that was actually asked by a bunch of candidates who I was interviewing, saying, what
Mm.
next? I mean, in 2 years I'll learn whatever there is to learn as the chief of staff. Can I move to a particular vertical after that, or can I kind of progress to becoming the CEO of the company? And the answer to that was an absolute yes, especially in early stages. uh, management teams are very open to having sharp candidates or amazing candidates retained. So yeah, that's something you can look forward to as well.
That's amazing. Great, Anvita. I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time for doing this. There was a ton of amazing information that you've shared with me that will personally help me and a lot of people who will be listening to you. So thank you so much for being a part of this show.